This man is an adjudicated sexual abuser. Okay? Adjudicated by a jury in the Southern District of New York, found liable for something that most people, as the judge said 3 times, consider rape. The thing about Donald Trump is,
and of course, he sued ABC News when George Stephanopoulos said that, even though Stephanopoulos was quoting the judge and ABC News settled.
Yeah, Stephanopoulos didn't quite say it the right way, but the judge said it 3 times. He is a narcissistic sociopath, and he doesn't believe in anybody other than himself. He doesn't believe in the country. He doesn't believe in any of you. He doesn't believe in the rule of law. He doesn't believe in the Constitution that he would swear to uphold. And he's all about his aggrandizement and putting himself first and revenge. And that's what narcissistic sociopaths do. They seek revenge.
You ever notice how Donald Trump's biggest enemy isn't Joe Biden, Barack Obama, or the FBI? It's a lawyer who never even ran for office and happens to be married to one of Trump's own top advisors. Yeah, I'm talking about George Conway, the man who went from conservative insider to Trump's personal nightmare. The man who dismantled Trump's ego using the one thing that actually hurts him: facts. And last night, Trump completely lost it again after Conway shredded him on live TV.
Maybe for a few hours, maybe for a few days. We've seen it before. We've seen him say and do outrageous things. And early on in his presidency, we'd see him say the most insane things. And then all of a sudden, he'd tamp it down for a few hours and read from a teleprompter. And they'd say, oh, this is the new Donald Trump. Well, there is no new Donald Trump. The Donald Trump that you see today is the same Donald Trump that people who have been watching him closely for years and who I unfortunately had to watch over the last several years. It's the same Donald Trump. He is, as Judge Kaplan, the presiding judge in this case, said, he's somebody who can't control himself.
And before we get rolling, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to America Facticity right now. We don't do spin here, we do truth. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for how deep this feud really goes. Let's rewind the tape. It's 2018, early in Trump's presidency. The White House is chaos, Twitter is the new press conference, and Kellyanne Conway, Trump's alternative facts queen, is on every network defending his latest meltdown.
Well, he's reaching his final destination, which is complete decompensation. None of his tricks are working anymore. We're on to them. They don't excite anybody anymore. He's losing in the polls. He has to try to make things up. His own vice presidential candidate on another network today basically said, we're making up stories in order to win this election.
You know, they're fishing, they're just itching to do the unthinkable. There it is. He's basically accusing the government of trying to take him out. And, 10 million people get this email. I don't know how many people get this email. All it takes is 1 or 2 of them to shoot somebody thinking that, hey, if the government's trying to shoot my president, I'm gonna fight back. And it's absolutely appalling.
Meanwhile, her husband, George Conway, a lifelong Republican lawyer, is sitting at home looking at the same headlines and thinking, what the hell happened to my party? Now, this wasn't some random liberal activist. This was one of the conservative legal minds who helped shape the modern Republican judicial strategy. The man was literally shortlisted for senior Justice Department roles before Trump took office. But when Trump started bending the Constitution like a cheap spoon, George decided someone had to say what others were too scared to.
What we have here isn't traditional conservatism. It isn't traditional republicanism. It is authoritarianism, but I think a better word for it, as I think about it, one that more people can understand, is gangsterism, thuggism. We don't have Ronald Reagan anymore. We have Tony Soprano. He's holding people up, threatening them, bullying them, doing things that are beyond his legal power to do. And that scares people. It makes people pay protection money. We see Harvard possibly knuckling under to pay $500 million. We see these chip makers who are essentially saying, okay, take money from us. And we see the intimidation of people who have had the courage, like Miles, to speak out and criticize the president. And there is no limit to how low he will go and what he will do to intimidate and to threaten and to assert power over things.
That Donald Trump is unfit for office, mentally, morally, and constitutionally. And he didn't whisper it in private. He wrote it loudly. In The Atlantic, October 2019, came his essay titled Unfit for Office. It wasn't an opinion piece, it was a diagnosis. Conway used the language of law and psychiatry, calling Trump's behavior pathological, narcissistic, and dangerous to democracy. He broke down every symptom.
And, it's not working for him, and he knows it, and he knows he's going down. And the more he feels that he's going down, remember, he's running not just for president, he's running from prison. You're going to see him engage in more and more desperate behavior. And that's what you see with I Hate Taylor Swift, is he's just lashing out. And, his people have lost control over him. And the only person who seems to have any control over him is the person who's telling him or whispering in his ear or doing something to tell him that everything's great, you're amazing, and that's Laura Loomer. And that's where this is the ultimate implosion, and we're watching it live, and it's going to get worse.
The lying, the impulsivity, the rage, the inability to accept reality, and tied it to Trump's unfitness to lead. According to The Atlantic, it was one of their most read political essays of the year. Trump saw it and predictably lost his mind. On Truth Social, he called Conway a stone-cold loser and the husband from hell. You can practically hear the caps lock breaking on his keyboard. Conway didn't even respond. He didn't have to, because while Trump was screaming into the void, Conway was calmly dismantling him on national television.
And he can't control himself because he's a deeply disturbed, a deeply morally bereft human being who has no conscience, has no morality, has no empathy, has no remorse, and is sadistic, as we saw during the trial, and as the jurors saw in the trial, right in front of their very eyes, that he had nothing but contempt for the woman that he raped and libeled and defamed so many times. This is a sick man. He is a bad man. And what's most disturbing about this is that so many people make this about politics, that they want to support him for whatever reason or because they've done it in the past, and they pretend that he is not who he is. And many of them, some of them are ignoramuses, but many of them in the upper reaches of his political party know better. They know who he is. They talk about who he is behind closed doors. They know he is an evil man. They know he is a sick man. They talk about his mental deficiencies, his psychological disorders. They talk about what a pathological liar he is. And then when somebody asks them to go on the record to talk about it, they say, oh, no comment, I didn't see the tweet.
By then, he'd co-founded the Lincoln Project, a group of ex-Republicans who decided enough was enough. Their mission, use Trump's own tactics against him. Their ads were savage, cinematic punches straight to Trump's ego. One ad called Morning in America hit so hard that, according to the New York Times, Trump called his staff into the Oval Office demanding to know, who are these people? Spoiler, they were lifelong Republicans like Conway who saw Trump as a con man who hijacked their party.
The only way you kind of get around it is he focuses on something else for a little while, and then maybe you can be left alone for a bit. And that's the problem here is people are doing this, are fighting back or not fighting back because they're behaving like they're in silos. The only way this stops is if people all get together, people of different stripes, people who are in industry, people who are in politics, people who are in universities get together and say, enough. None of us are going to give in to this. And that's how this ends.
Now let me ask you this. Do you think George Conway is a hero for standing up to his own side or a traitor for breaking ranks? I genuinely want to know what you think. Drop it in the comments. I read as many as I can. Meanwhile, Conway kept appearing on MSNBC, CNN, and Morning Joe. And unlike Trump's usual TV critics, he didn't rant, he reasoned. He spoke slowly, surgically, like a man used to cross-examining liars. He'd say, this isn't about politics, it's about the law.
What do you think it says about America that the voters have spoken, the courts have spoken, and now tonight the Electoral College has spoken, and still the sitting president of the United States refuses to, at the very least, even acknowledge his duly elected successor?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Anderson. I think it says a lot about the president and less about the country. I think it says three things about the president. One is he's delusional, as you just said. Secondly, he's basically running a scam, a financial and otherwise scam on the American people, or at least some segment of the American people. And third, he's malevolent. He's seeking to undermine. If he can't have the presidency, he doesn't want anyone else to have the presidency undamaged, and he's seeking to undermine the next administration. I mean, to go to the point of delusion about how delusional he is, they brought a lawsuit. The Trump campaign brought a lawsuit today in New Mexico, in federal district court, arguing that too many drop boxes were put in different places before the election. A lawsuit they could have brought more than 41 days ago when the election was held. And think about it, it makes absolutely no sense to bring this lawsuit. Mm-hmm. New Mexico has only 5 electoral votes, and he's down by 74. He lost New Mexico by 100,000 votes, 11%. There is literally, and today, the electors of New Mexico and 49 other states cast their votes. No court is going to give relief.
He told Nicole Wallace that Trump's behavior met every definition of obstruction. He told Lawrence O'Donnell that the Mueller report proved what Republicans refused to read. And he warned, long before January 6th, that Trump's obsession with power was steering the country toward something very dark. Then came the Capitol attack, and Conway's words aged like prophecy. On Morning Joe, he said, Donald Trump lit the match, watched the fire, and refused to call the fire department.
I mean, he was telling us he would do these things, and people didn't believe him because they think he's a buffoon, they think he's a moron, including the people who worked for him before, and people who voted for him. He just blows smoke. It's like, no. He's programmed this way. He's a sick man. I think the Republican Party may be in its death throes. And if Donald Trump loses, and here's the reason. They fired everybody at the RNC and made them reapply for their jobs. He moved the RNC down to Florida. He put his daughter-in-law in charge of it, and he merged it with his campaign. Now, what happens to political campaigns after the candidate loses? Poof. They disappear into thin air, like they never existed. That's what could happen to the RNC, because it basically has become a wholly owned subsidiary of the Trump campaign.
He called it an attempted coup in plain sight. Trump lashed out again online, saying Conway was a jealous husband who doesn't know what love is. But America wasn't laughing, because Conway had predicted this exact outcome months earlier. And here's what makes Conway's criticism sting so much. He's not coming from the left. He's a lifelong conservative who loves the Constitution and knows exactly how presidents are supposed to behave.
And you can't let him testify. He'd be torn to shreds in about 3 minutes. But that said, he never listens to his lawyers. If he doesn't testify, it's not going to be because he all of a sudden decided to follow legal advice. He's causing his lawyers to do stupid things in court, like the cross-examination of Stormy and the miscues the other day and the cross-examination of Mike Cohen. He doesn't listen to his lawyers. If he doesn't testify, it's because he's scared. Donald, you are scared. You like to go out and stand out there in the hallway and say all the things that you say because nobody gets to ask you questions. And if they ask you questions, you just turn around and walk away.
He's like the prosecutor who helped write the rules, then had to watch someone like Trump trample all over them. In interview after interview, Conway described Trump as lawless, corrupt, and psychologically broken. He went further than most Democrats ever did. He said Trump's narcissism wasn't just a character flaw, it was an existential threat. When asked on CNN whether Trump could handle crisis decision-making, Conway said he can't.
You, Donald, I hope you're listening to me, you are a wuss. You are scared of actually doing what Stormy Daniels had to do and what Michael Cohen had to do and what every other person who's called, you can't call these people liars, Donald, unless you go on the stand and tell your truth. Let's hear it. Let's see how you do. Are you afraid, Donald? I think you are. We have not had a full national conversation about this man's psychological condition.
Have we not? I feel like we've been talking about every single day.
No, we haven't. No, the press, the mainstream, we say, oh, he's nuts, he's nuts. He's literally, if you look him up in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5. Sure. He's a narcissistic sociopath. He has narcissistic personality disorder, and he has sociopath. Yeah. And what needs to be done is that needs to be talked about openly. It needs to be pointed out when he is doing things that meet those criteria, and it's got to be pointed out And it drives him nuts when people do that.
He's impulsive, delusional, and incapable of empathy. He doesn't serve the office serves him. That line, the office serves him, became viral. It captured exactly what America had been feeling, that the presidency wasn't leading the country anymore. It was feeding one man's ego. Now fast forward to 2023 and 2024, Trump's criminal indictments start rolling in. The hush money case, the classified documents case, the Georgia election interference case, and Conway is back on TV.
Well, I mean, if you did that in a courtroom, you'd be verge on being held in contempt. The judge would ask the jury to leave the room and the judge would beam you out. I would hope that Republican senators who, like all senators generally, value decorum in the world's greatest deliberative body would find that offensive, because it was offensive. And it was offensive not just because there was a personal attack on counsel for the other side, the managers, but because this assertion that the president is truthful is beyond belief.
Here's a man
with 16,200 lies documented in this town's major newspaper. He's incapable, virtually incapable of telling the truth about anything, even when it's helpful to him. He's a pathological liar, and we have a lawyer standing up before the Senate saying he's truthful and he's a man of his word. I mean, that's just absurd.
When Trump was found liable for sexual assault and defamation against E. Jean Carroll, Conway told MSNBC, "There is now a legal verdict that the former president of the United States sexually assaulted a woman. That's not fake news, that's fact." Trump went berserk. He called Conway a sicko, a fraud, and a loser lawyer nobody listens to. But millions were listening, and because Conway was saying what prosecutors and judges couldn't, that the rule of law still means something.
This point, the lawsuit is just a joke. It's crazy, and it's delusional, as you said.
But if you look at it as a grift, I mean, if the grift is getting money, raising money from people who genuinely believe the president, you know, continuing the law, these frivolous lawsuits allows, or at least gives cover for the grift. No, I mean, he's making a lot of money.
Correct. I mean, I saw one figure, I think it was reported on your air, that they had raised over $200 million to pay, what, lawyers who aren't worth a nickel? But it's more than that. It's also he needs to convince himself and his supporters for his own psychological needs that he actually won the election. And that's where you get back to the point that he's delusional. He can't see the truth from his own lies and his own fantasies. I mean, imagine if a network executive at CNN behaved like this. Imagine if a pilot at United Airlines behaved like this. Imagine if an Army colonel behaved like this. Imagine if Kyle Shanahan, the coach of the 49ers, went out after the Super Bowl, after losing the Super Bowl, and said, "Hey, all those points in the fourth quarter were fake. Those passes by Mahomes weren't real. They shouldn't have counted." And then brought 60 lawsuits and lost them all. All these people will be cashiered in a minute or made to talk to someone.
He also pointed out that Trump's endless cries of witch hunt were contradicted by the evidence Trump's own lawyers submitted. Every time Trump claimed he was exonerated, Conway would pull up the transcript and read it line by line, calmly showing why that wasn't true. It wasn't emotional, it was devastating. Let's talk about the personal layer. While George was dismantling Trump's image in public, Kellyanne Conway was still working for him inside the White House. That dynamic fascinated the media. Trump reportedly mocked their marriage on several occasions.
Große Lüge is big lie. It means big lie. It was a phrase coined by Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf in 1925 for a propaganda technique by which you tell as big a lie as possible so that people will believe bigger lies. They will believe bigger lies more than they will believe smaller lies, because they simply think that it's impossible for anybody to have the temerity to tell such an amazingly large lie. But Donald Trump does that as a matter of course. He's a pathological liar and a sociopath. This is par for the course for Donald Trump, just as his lies about about the supposedly stolen election in 2020 were grosse Lüge. And this is what he does, and it's why he is a cancer on American public life that must be removed once and for all.
He couldn't handle the idea that someone inside his circle was being intellectually dismantled by a member of his own team's family. But George never made it personal. When asked about Kellyanne, he'd say, "She does her job, I'm doing mine." And honestly, that made his case even stronger, and because it wasn't about revenge, it was about integrity. Now, Trump World tried to dismiss him, calling him a fame seeker. But here's the catch: George Conway never ran for office, never took campaign donations.
Ultimately now, because he has the power to do it, prosecuting people who disagree with him. And this is not America. This is not healthy. This is, and I hate, people don't want us to reach this conclusion. This is authoritarianism. We have never seen anything like this in America. Everybody else in the entire world, I traveled to Europe twice this year, people were watching out there because they understand history. And they're seeing in America things that happen. I was in Spain. They're seeing what happened with Franco. In Europe, they're seeing what happened with Hitler. This is how it's done. And it may seem alarmist to Americans who enjoy who enjoy our lives here, a beautiful country with so many things to do and so many ways to entertain ourselves. And it's time for Americans to wake up.
Never joined a rival party. His power came from credibility, from being one of the few conservatives willing to call Trump what he is. He once said, "I'm not anti-Republican, I'm anti-crazy." And that's become his unofficial slogan. In the years since Trump left office, Conway hasn't stopped. When Trump started floating the idea that presidents should have total immunity, Conway laughed on MSNBC and said, "That's not how America works. The founders fought a revolution to get rid of kings, not to create one in a red tie."
They say, like a presidential candidate recently did, "I haven't been following the case," or something like that. And they're all lying to protect a pathological liar. And it's about time that these people look themselves in the mirror and start telling the truth. Okay, it's better for them in the long run to start telling the truth and admit that they've been covering up for a sexual predator, a criminal, a thief, a man who does not deserve to hold any office, let alone the highest office in the land. But this is, again, it's not about politics.
That clip racked up millions of views because it was the perfect mix of legal truth and sarcastic delivery. The kind of statement you can't argue with unless you're delusional enough to think the Constitution is optional. He's also been relentless about reminding people that democracy isn't self-cleaning. He said repeatedly, "Trump didn't break America, he exposed who's willing to help break it." And honestly, he's right. Because while Trump might be loud, Conway proved that logic and the law can still cut deeper than all caps tweets.
Now let's look at the state level. There are literally these political bloodbaths going on. Michigan, Arizona, where you have the semi-normal MAGAs who are run-of-the-mill, spineless, craven Republicans who support Trump because that's their meal ticket, and would support someone else if somebody else were in charge. And then the Carrie Lakes and Laurel Loomer types and the MTG types, okay, who basically want to burn everything down, and they don't care. They don't actually care about winning elections. It's all this sort of performative nonsense, and I don't know if there's a viable Republican Party or a viable Republican establishment after this is all over.
Do you think George Conway's transformation from conservative lawyer to Trump's biggest Republican critic is bravery or just common sense? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to see if people think of him as a hero or a hypocrite, because personally, I think he's the conservative America needed all along. And look, this story isn't over. Trump's still raging, still posting, still pretending every indictment is a trophy. But every time he screams about witch hunts or rigged justice, somewhere, George Conway is sitting behind a news desk or in front of a camera calmly explaining why Trump is wrong.
So that's why it's hard for me to say, oh, the Epstein thing is a huge scandal. It's like, no, it's of a piece. It's part and parcel of the most evil man ever to surface in American politics.
At the end of the day, George Conway might not have run for office, but he did something even braver. He stood up to a president who couldn't stand the truth. And as long as Trump keeps shouting, Conway's calm voice of reason will keep echoing, louder, sharper, and stronger than ever. Because facts don't care about feelings, especially Trump's.